Welcome to today's Qualified at the Intersection. Well, I was going to do a piece on the EEOC and how Donald Trump is dismantling that, but I'll save that for tomorrow. But today, I'm going to circle back to something. Some of you may have joined my live on the True History of Columbus Day, and I will link to that in this newsletter. So if you didn't get to watch it, go back, take a look. But for those of you who did, and there were a lot of you, I want to expand on this because something I talked about during that live, which is how people who were not initially seen as white by the United States, specifically, I was talking about Italian Americans, have become some of the fiercest, most racist guards of white supremacy because they barely are in the door. You know, the reason we have Columbus Day to celebrate is because 11 Italian Americans were hung by white people in the country who did not see them as white. They were killed in New Orleans, and the United States almost came to war with Italy over it. And the year after they were killed, I believe it was 1892, the president Benjamin Harris declared a one-time holiday, Columbus Day, to try to get other white people to see them as white. They took up the mantle. They kept celebrating it into the 40s until it became a federal holiday. But something about this whole thing, and when I did the live, I talked about this. There were two ways they could have gone, which is to reject white supremacy, which mutilated and murdered at least 11 people in New Orleans. And we know that throughout the South, other Italian Americans were hung. They were maligned in every major newspaper in the country as criminals, thieves, and not white. Um, so, but instead of rejecting white supremacy, they developed a type of Stockholm syndrome to want to be white so desperately. They didn't want to be seen as people who had any relationship to Black people, even though the color of their skin, the texture of their hair sure implicated something. They didn't want that. And so instead of thinking about solidarity with people who they had good relationships, Italians and Blacks in the South, and to some extent in the North, had decent and good relationships. And these relationships were frayed by several things. The Civil War was one of them, where the ethnics in the North didn't want to participate in the Civil War. And then number two, it was racial violence in the South, where the Italians didn't want violence to happen to them. And instead of being angry at the people who committed the violence, they became angry at the people who they felt being around expose them to violence. And so you see that still today in Italian Americans and these younger people. So we're talking about people 25 to 40 years old. And the Politico story had this in it. And I wanted to bring it up, but there's another story today. So first of all, there was a person in the Politico chat, the Nazi chat, whose last name appears to be Italian. It's Giunta. And he says something in the chat. He says, if your pilot is a she and she looks 10 shades darker than someone from Sicily, just end it there. Scream the no word. So scream the N word, call them a N word. But what I find most instructive in that sentence, if they're 10 shades darker than someone from Sicily. So these old fears and grievances about being too dark to be white and using Sicilians as their floor. And then we go under Sicilians, right? Because they want to make sure that, if they're dark enough to be Sicilian, but too dark that they tip over into Black, then they're an N-word. This is the psychological mind fuck that has happened to people that is being woven in historically into today's mindset. And if you doubt that, there is another one. 30-year-old Paul Ingrassia, who was nominated to be to serve as special counsel for the United States. His job was going to be safeguarding federal whistleblowers. He's still going up for nomination, although people claim they're not going to vote for him, but who knows, they might. He, in a chat, said he has a Nazi streak, and he said that all holidays related to Black people should be eviscerated. He says that Martin Luther King Jr. was just the George Floyd of his day, and his holiday should be tossed into the seventh circle of hell where it belongs. This comes from The Guardian. He wrote in messages in 2024, according to Politico, that holidays commemorating Black people, such as Black History Month or Juneteenth, should be eviscerated. And he used an Italian slur for Black people, and that he has a Nazi streak. So I'm going to get to the Nazi thing in just a minute, but the shock troops of white supremacy are those who are barely in white supremacy. So the Italians are people who were not seen as white, such that other white Protestants had to try to do a PR campaign to convince other white people they were white. And instead of seeing the violence that was done to people like him by white supremacy in this country, he has done the thing that victim psychological trick people do, where they blame other victimizers for their victimization and not, or other people who are victims for their victimization and not the victimizers. It's a type of a Stockholm syndrome situation where they so desperately want to prostrate themselves at the throne of white supremacy, and they don't want any questions. This Ingrassia young man, he has the look, the dark hair, the very Italian features that in 1891, in 1920, 1940, 1950, 1960, until Civil Rights Act, would have made him a subject of discrimination in this country in housing, in education, and employment. But instead of saying that white supremacy did that, he blames Black people for that. If we didn't exist, if he didn't look so suspiciously like he might have some relationship to us, his life would be so much better. And so there is, this is where we are. And same thing for Robbie Starbuck, that young man that the HR Association, SHRM, is going to be platforming. 30-something, family came from Cuba. He doesn't know anything about this story. All he knows is to be white here is to hate Black people and make sure they stay down. Because if they come up, somehow people might notice I am suspiciously not fully white. I don't want anybody questioning me. So I want to make sure I stand on the necks of Black people so that I am elevated to a position of whiteness. This is the mindset, the sickness, the illness that poisons our system. And I had said in that newsletter that Italian Americans should take the lead in trying to eradicate Columbus Day. Not because I think Italians shouldn't have a holiday, but because Italian Americans need to wake up to the fact that that holiday only exists because of a cover-up for their murder and for discrimination against them, to cover it up. And so they should take the lead in trying to end that holiday and educate their young about the fact that we, Black people, are not their enemy. We have never been their enemy. We had good relationships in the South, which is one of the reasons many were hung and harassed. So instead of blaming the people who did the hanging and harassing, they blamed us. Our mere presence is the reason they were harmed, as opposed to the people doing the harm. So, I just wanted to update that Columbus Day talk, because sometimes I think people think when I'm talking about history, I'm just talking about history and I'm just going back to circles. But we're caught in a loop. We're caught in a horrific hell loop. And the only way we break out of it is by drawing these connections, by breaking free of this messaging. Because, this young man, Paul Ingrassia, he's already had high level positions within administration. And I do want to talk about the excessive Nazism talk. Politico, that group, this young man, I'm trying to understand how Stephen Miller, how, I forget, Paul Lutnick, how all these Jewish folks who work in this administration are able to twist their faces, to ignore these young people who clearly are not playing around when they are talking about how much they love gas chambers and how much they respect Nazism. I'm trying to understand, the Anti-Defamation League, I guess, has just fallen. It doesn't say anything anymore about the rise of Nazism within this administration. Could you imagine if Barack Obama would have had this many people in the administration speaking about wanting to be Nazis? He would have been physically removed from office. So this Nazism streak is a concern, but what's even more of a concern is you have Jewish organizations and Jewish folks who feel like, I guess a lot of people feel like they are being pushed by the left and the right, and they feel that the left's position on genocide in Palestine, in Gaza, and support of Palestinian people and the wrongs that the state of Israel has done is somehow so more dangerous than literal Nazis in the US government that they have decided to align themselves with conservative Republicans over liberal causes, which is crazy because these kids, just like they don't know the true history around race, they believe the Holocaust was faked. They believe Jewish people are, in fact, responsible for everything bad. They do believe there's a Jewish cabal running the world. These kids are dangerous. They are not kids, they are adults, and they are dangerous. And the fact that there has not been a substantial outcry from historical like the Anti-Defamation League and other Jewish organizations about the rise of Nazism, outright Nazism in the US government is going to be one of those things history is going to look back on and weep. So yeah, I just had to update this. I'm going to put a link to the live about Columbus Day and about the articles that I use. This came from Politico. It came from let's see here, the Guardian, and I don't know which Semaphore. So I will put these links below for you to follow up on. But I just want to bring into the modern day what I'm trying to get the word out, the impact of the decision to platform Columbus Day, the impact of that, which was over 100 years ago. Yeah, the impact of doing that, right, is still with us today. And I'm trying to draw that direct line. So from Columbus Day to Nazis in the White House.